Okay, on Perek 840, Pasuk Yud Daled. So the Torah goes through how to the purification process, which we began speaking about yesterday. They take the ashes of the red cow and then you sprinkle it on the person who became tameh, came into contact with a dead body. That was, remember, that was the only type of tameh that requires the red cow. And you cannot get out of tumas mace, out of becoming impure nowadays, because we don't have the para aduba. Now, in Perek Yudal, it says like this. A Pasuk Yudal, it's about 10 lines, 12 lines from the top. Pasuk Yudal on 840. Zos ha-Torah, this is the Torah. And the word Torah, by the way, Torah comes, you know what's the teacher called in Hebrew? Moreh. Moreh is a teacher. It's all the same root. Moreh, hora'ah is instruction. Torah means instruction. That's why the Torah is called Torah, because it's a book of instruction on how to live. Not just keeping halacha, it's a book of instructions on how to live. So it says, Zos ha-Torah, this is the instruction. Adam ki yamus ba'ohel, when a man dies in a tent. Kol haba el ha'oil v'chol asher ba'oil yitma shivas yamim. Anybody who enters the tent is tameh for 7 days. This is the law of ritual impurity, tuma, which is conveyed through, and we spoke about this a few parshas ago, that if there's a body inside an enclosure with a roof over it, so anything underneath that roof becomes tameh. The tuma spreads to the entire enclosure. This could be as well. It could be if let's say this is the dead body over here. These glasses are a dead body, and there are trees over here overhanging it, and the branches overhang. Somebody walks under the branches over here, is also tameh, because this is a roof over the dead body. So you have to be very careful if you're a Kohen. Any of you Kohanim? Nobody here is a Kohen? Only me? Lonely at the top. The what do you call it? The only what happened here? Oh, okay. No, just the wire. Pull it. Okay. So so the Torah over here talks about the instruction for tuma. If a person is what's called tumas ohel. Ohel literally means a tent. Now, there's another meaning for ohel. And if you turn back to Parshas Toldos, all the way to the beginning of Parshas Toldos, okay, on page 124. Sorry, 126, I lied, 126. Okay, so on 120, keep your finger on the place here, but look at 126. This is the birth of Yaakov and Esav. Don't sit right over here, sit over there. Yeah. This is the birth of Yaakov and Esav. And on the fourth line, the Torah says on 126, the fourth line, Vayigdelu ha'ne'orim, the boys get older. Vayhi Esav ish yodei atzayid ish sada. Esav becomes a hunter who's out in the fields. V'Yaakov ish tam. Yaakov is a refined person. Yoshev oholim. He dwelled in the tents. Now, what tents are these? Take a look at Rashi. The first is Rashi's on the left side, a left column of Rashi, fourth line. Yoshev oholim. He dwelled in the tents. Oholo shel Shem, ve'oholo shel Aver. Shem and Aver were teaching Torah, and Yaakov dwelled in the tents of Torah. And we always talk about an ohel has a double meaning. An ohel could be in a tent, and an ohel always alludes to the concept of a tent of Torah, a beis medrash, where people are sitting and studying Torah. Ita, you have a chomesh? You got it. Okay, good. Make yourself comfortable. Put it on the table if you want. When you look at this pasuk again now, take a look at this pasuk again, and this pasuk has an allusion. This is what many of the commentaries in the Midrashim speak about. Because it's very strange. We very rarely find Torah used in any context other than the Torah itself. And here the Torah goes and the Torah does something different. Look at the Torah does something, it uses the word Torah out of context. Because although I told you that Torah means instruction, comes from the root of hora, instruction, but when it says these are the rules of death and tuma, and it introduced by saying Zos ha-Torah Adam ki yamus ba'ohel. So the commentaries, the Midrashim, take this completely out of context. And the commentaries Rashi brings down over here, No, Rashi doesn't bring it down. Where does Rashi bring it down somewhere? Zosat Torah Adam Kiyasa Ohel means for a person to acquire Torah on page 840. On page 840, Pasuk Yudal. We're back on 840 now. Back on 840, 11 lines from the top. Zosat Torah Adam Kiyamos Vel. This is the instruction when a person dies in the tent, and it goes into the technical laws of ritual impurity. But the Midrashim say Zosat Torah Adam Kiyamos Vel. If you want to master Torah, you have to kill yourself in the tents of Torah. That means, we're not talking about, Torah-assisted suicide here. What we're talking about is you have to kill yourself in Torah means that a person has to be completely singularly devoted to Torah if you want to master it. You guys learned enough to see, just to learn one page of Gemara or one Tosos, it could take you a week or a month. And so how do you ever accumulate this knowledge? How does one end up like Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky Zatzal or Reb Moshe Feinstein? These were people who were singularly focused. And a person under the Rambam writes you can't acquire Torah and master Torah. When he says acquire Torah, I mean to really master Torah. You can't master Torah with luxuries and eating and all sorts of comforts. A person has to be singularly devoted to it. And like anything else in life, and I'll give you 3 examples from the world of sports because I find that is always the best example, and they're the only examples that I know. But it's always the best example because in sports you see that you have a lot of people who are very, very devoted to a cause. And if you've got talent, there are a lot of people who are talented in the cause. Who rises to the top? The guys who really work at it rise to the top. You know, everybody talked about Michael Jordan's natural talent. Michael Jordan was also the first guy at practice, and he practiced hard. And he practiced all the time. Larry Bird practiced all these. It wasn't just if you were relying on natural talent. It's not going to take you far enough. Now, some of you have heard of Pete Maravich. If you haven't, you should have. But Pete Maravich, hold the question for a while. If Pete Maravich was a basketball player who was arguably, I mean, it could be 1 or 2 others, except arguably the best ball handler. He had remarkable ball handling skills, and he was able to pass with blind passes. He was a magician. Pete Maravich. I saw an interview. I read his biography, and Pete Maravich. He also died when he was 40 years old. He collapsed on a basketball court. When they did an autopsy, they found out that he only had one. You're supposed to have 2 somethings in your heart, and he only had one of them. And most people only have one of these things. Some tube or something in the heart. And most people who have it die by the time they're 18. So the doctors were astonished that here's a guy who played professional basketball with only one of these things, and then he collapsed playing a choose-up game after he retired. He was 40 years old, collapsed on a basketball court. Pete Maravich said that when he was 12 years old, he was shooting baskets 8 hours a day. Right? Now, there's a guy with a lot of natural talent. His father was his coach. His father was a bit of a Michiganer. His mother committed suicide. And his father was also singularly focused, and he came up with all sorts of drills to train Pete Maravich. So, for example, he would have him lie across the back seat of a car with the door open. The father would drive, and Pete Maravich had to dribble the ball on the street while his father drove the car. Right? They have what do you call it? Yeah, that's what it takes. And they have something called, Pete Maravich had a drill that he himself made up, which they actually, if you could access this online, called the spider dribble or something like that, where Pete Maravich teaches you how to dribble. It's a ridiculous thing. It's very, very difficult. The point is that he got there not only on the talent, he got there because he was singularly devoted from the earliest age. Example number 1. Example number 2, I had a guy here in the yeshiva who knew a girl who was training at the university, one of the Florida universities. She was training for the American Olympic swim team. And she told him, and he told me, that between the ages of 9 and 17, there were 4 days between the ages of 9 and 17 that she was not in a pool. Yeah, well, that's what it takes. And she never made it either. She made the American team. She never won a medal. 4 days between the ages of 9, because if you don't, somebody else will be. And somebody's going to be doing it. And especially these guys, the tennis pros, their fathers, their parents are all lunatics. And they have them play. I told you, Andre Agassi played a tournament when he was about 12 years old. He finished 2nd. And on the way out to the parking lot, his father took the trophy and he dumped it in the garbage dumpster. He said, "We didn't enter to finish 2nd. Wow. Yes, so these are, it takes a certain, I saw an interview once with Lou Ferrigno, who was the Incredible Hulk. And, Lou Ferrigno was all built up and muscular and everything else. And he said that he would go into the weight room and he would pump iron in the weight room until he passed out from the pain. I certainly hope he had a good spotter, right? But he would pump iron until he passed. Well, that's how you get there. That's how you get there. And if you're not going to do it, you're not going to get there because somebody else will. So the last example was a girl that once came to my house, a guy who was a Talmud here in the yeshiva, got married. Young lady, they came to the house for Shabbos, and this is a young lady who told me that we're sitting at the Shabbos table, and a very nice couple, and she said that she had been training for the United States. She was also training to be a gymnast. So at 9 years old, her parents sent her from somewhere on the East Coast, like New Jersey. They sent her to Arizona because there's a special gymnast school in Arizona. That was the top gymnast school, and she was there at 9 years old, away from home, halfway, all the way across, basically across the country. At 13 or 14 years old, she was in a competition, and she fell in the competition, and she broke her collarbone. So she was in the hospital. Her parents flew across country to visit her, and when her parents walked into the hospital, the first thing her father said to her was, "Andrea, you've disappointed us." So I said to her, I remember we're sitting at the shop, and she's telling us a story. I basically dropped my chomp when she said that, and I just said to her, "What kind of relationship do you have with your father now?" She goes, "It's strained." Strained. A strained relationship. Well, you put it through a sieve. You strain it to get the juice out. Strained. I mean, the relationship not very good. That's why a father who says to his daughter, "You've disappointed us. It's not going to be great." But the lesson is that if you want to learn Torah, and you want to study Torah, you want to master Torah, so then it takes a certain amount of devotion. Now, each person has to be careful over here because you have to know what your strengths are. But when you go back to, just a few years ago, there was a Rosh Yeshiva in Israel named Rabbi Yeshivat Ohr Somayach. He was the head of the yeshiva in the south called Netivot. He himself was a student from Panovich in the early years of Panovich. Now, his daily schedule, not his daily schedule, you have a mishmar, right? You know what a mishmar really is? Mishmar here means 45 minutes of learning and then cholt. That's what a mishmar is. But in the regular mainstream, what the mishmar meant was staying up all night learning. So Rabbi Yeshivat Ohr Somayach, who I heard a shir from him once, that he was absolutely fluent in Shas. He knew Shas like the first 3 psukim of Ashrei. Right? He was when he gave the shir, he was reminiscing about Shas. It reminded me of somebody talking about their family members. That's how he was, just picking out Gemaras from here, and it was almost reminiscing about it. So his schedule was Thursday afternoon, he would shower and change into his Shabbos clothing. And then he stayed up, he learned till Thursday night. Then he did a mishmar all night, daven shachris, and then he studied all day Friday. And then Friday night he ate his meal, then he studied some more. And then he went to sleep for 6 hours and went to shachris the next morning. Now, that was only Rabbi Yeshivat Ohr Somayach. Reb Chaim Kanievsky's father was the Stipler. The Stipler, he married the Chazon Ish's sister. So the legend has it, now there are 2 versions of the story. One version of the story is the Chazon Ish, and this is documented, this is true, the Chazon Ish was looking for a shidduch for his sister. His sister was a little older, she was about 27 years old, and the Chazon Ish came across a pamphlet of Torah ideas that were written by a student in Bialystok, in the yeshiva in Bialystok, and the Chazon Ish was in Vilna, and he read this pamphlet, and he said the author of this pamphlet is obviously a young budding scholar, and he's obviously got Yiras Shamayim, which the Chazon Ish could sense just reading what he wrote, and he said this guy would be probably a good match for my sister. So they arranged for the Stipler to meet the Chazon Ish's sister. So the Stipler came to Vilna, and they went into, Chazon Ish's sister was there. There are different versions of the story. One version is that they sat in the room, you talk, at a shidduch, you talk, and the Chazon Ish, they finished talking, and it didn't last too long, we don't let it go for too long, these things. And after the Chazon Ish's sister came out, she said she's not interested in marrying him. So Chazon Ish said, "Why?" So she said, "Well, I was in the middle of talking and he fell asleep. I can't marry a man who falls asleep when I talk." So Chazon Ish said, "Just 1 second, let me just talk to him first." So Chazon Ish said to the Stipler, "My sister said you fell asleep. What happened?" So Stipler said to the Chazon Ish, "Well, my schedule right now is that I sleep for 6 hours, I wake up Sunday morning, and then I make a mishmar. And then I go to sleep Monday night for 6 hours. I wake up Tuesday morning, and I study straight through, besides all the whatever, eating and bodily needs. And then I go to sleep on Wednesday night for 6 hours. That means he was on a 36 hours on, 6 hours off schedule. He said, well, he calculated that the train ride from Bialystok to Vilna would take 6 hours. So what he did was, instead of sleeping when he was supposed to, he pushed himself through a second night, so he's up 48 hours now. And then he got on the train. And when he got on the train, he took one look at the upholstery, and he saw that the upholstery on this train might be shatnez. So he refused to sit down, so he stood for 6 hours on the train reciting Mishnayos. And then he said, when I got here and I sat down in the room with your sister, it's first I haven't slept in about 48 hours, and I was a bit tired, so I dozed off. So the Chazon Ish said to his sister, listen, he didn't listen to you, but one day the entire world's going to listen to him. It's worth marrying him, right? So, hold all the questions for a while. So the point is that the Torah is emphasizing over here that if a person wants to master Torah, it's like anything else, it has to be their singular devotion. A person has to be singularly devoted. Now, it does not allow for being unpleasant to other people, and doesn't allow for neglecting your wife and your family and your kids and everything else. But there has to be the same Stipler, by the way, the same Stipler who, when he got married, when his wife would go to sleep, he would lie down in the room also, so that she shouldn't feel that, he'd talk to her until she fell asleep, then we'd get up and continue learning. So he's got a wife, he's got to take care of a family. So there has to be a balance, but a person has to know that it requires, that's the first idea here. The second idea here is, there was a man who had a grocery store. And one day he said to his wife, from now on, I think I'm going to take a few hours off in the morning to study Torah. Worked at a grocery store all day. In the morning hours, I'm going to take off a few hours to study Torah. So, went to the Beis Medrash and he learned Torah. He left his wife in charge of the grocery store. After a couple of days, with customers and keeping the tabs and the bills, his wife said to him, listen, I can't do this. I need your help in the grocery store. He said, listen, and he quoted this pasuk, Adam ki yamus b'hol. Let me ask you a question. If I died, right, you wouldn't be able to say to me, listen, I need your help in the grocery store, would you? Right, that you wouldn't be able to say. In the morning hour, from the morning between the hours of 9 and 12, imagine I died, right? Because now I'm learning Torah. So, again, obviously it requires a certain amount of balance, but at the end of the day, the same way we are devoted to other things, a person has to find that kind of devotion for Torah. That's the first lesson here. Now, in Pasuk Tes Zayin, where it says, it goes through these laws of ritual and purity, and the dead body is the highest level of impurity. So why is that? Why is the dead body? By the way, something that people don't realize, the higher the level, the more impurity. Now what that means is a dead dog does not convey as much impurity, as much tuma, as a dead body. And a Gentile's dead body does not convey as much tuma as a Jewish person's dead body. Why is that? Because to the degree of kedusha, where there's holiness, when the holiness leaves, the neshama leaves, that leaves a greater vacuum. There's a greater vacuum. There's an absence of kedusha, and therefore there's more tuma in that body. There is now more tuma. On a deeper level, the forces of tuma, the spiritual forces of tuma, always gravitate towards where kedusha is, where holiness is, and they want to invade. And so where there's a vacuum, where the neshama was there, they kind of, the Death Eaters kind of try to get in there. But be that without going into the Kabbalistic ideas, why is it that the Torah says that a body has such a high level of tuma? So the commentators explain several ideas. First of all, a body has to be buried as soon as possible. Do you know that in Judaism there's no such thing as a viewing? No viewing in Judaism. They don't leave the body out and view it. They bury the body as soon as possible. In Yerushalayim, the tradition in Yerushalayim is to bury the body within hours after the patir of the body is buried. The idea here is that the Torah, and you see that the Torah obviously understands human nature because God created human nature. And the viewing, until the body is buried, the family cannot begin the recovery process, which is why you don't comfort a mourner until the body is buried. You do not begin the comforting process until the body is buried. When a person has suffered a loss, The first thing is to start the recovery. The recovery process only begins after the funeral, after the body is buried. I saw in Time magazine, they had people they do viewings. They have a viewing of sometimes they'll leave a body out for 3 days, for viewing. And they actually have an issue in Time magazine where viewing the body, the person would leave in his will what pose he wants to be in when he's viewed. And I remember they had pictures in Time magazine of a guy, he's wearing a baseball uniform like this. This is how he's being viewed. Away. And they had this guy's viewed sitting in a Cadillac, and they had a different viewing. Torah we don't do anything well. Body person is nifter, try to get him buried as soon as possible. Number one, because it begins the recovery process. And once the person is buried, then they can start the process of recovery, number one. Number two, there is a concern of necromancy, of contacting the dead, which is something that in the ancient world happened. It's some sort of whatever we call sorcery. People would go contact the dead. People would go into cemeteries to try to communicate with the dead, and so on and so forth. And therefore, the sooner the body is out of the way, sooner the body is removed, the sooner a person, the less chance there is of getting involved in that sort of nonsense. And number three, the commentaries point out that in the ancient world, they actually used human bones in order to make utensils. You didn't go into a hardware store and just buy a cup and a saucer. You had to find, and if you didn't have a lot of money, there's grandpa's elbow. That would be a good teacup, So in order to avoid, and it's prohibited according to halacha to get any benefit from a dead body, and therefore the body is buried as soon as possible before people could start cremation is completely forbidden according to halacha, and cremation is forbidden, and any sort of something people cremate somebody, they put the ashes in a little cup and they leave it in the home. There's John over there, and right on the shelf, so that according to halacha, we don't do that. There's no cremation and that sort of thing, and cremation is not good for the neshama. So the burial process is good for the neshama. The sooner the body is buried, the sooner the neshama could start the cleansing process to go to its state of rest. Yes, Itamar, what were you going to ask?
You said in order to master Torah, you need to be singularly focused. So is there a way to essentially do kind of 50-50, which obviously doesn't make sense, but in a way, say, for some parts of your life you work and you do the kind of mundane avodah, and other times of your life you're singularly focused on Torah, and is that a way that someone could reach a form of mastery?
Good question. He's asking a very important question. And the answer is like this. People ask, why do we have the system of kollel nowadays? You've heard of the kollel, where people study Torah full time and they're supported. And there are a lot of people who quote the Rambam, because the Rambam says a person should work. Person should right? Everybody knows the Rambam. Okay. The problem with quoting the Rambam is twofold. Because number one, the same Rambam writes elsewhere. One place he writes that a person should work along with studying Torah. That Rambam you've heard, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. There's another Rambam that writes at the end of the chapter on Shemitah V'Yovel that anybody, not only the tribe of Levi, anybody who wants to neglect their worldly pursuits and devote themselves purely to spiritual pursuits may do so. People forget to quote that Rambam. And there's another Rambam that says that a man should only let his wife out of the house once in 30 days. Right? Now, so we have to make up our mind, are we going with the Rambam or we're not going with the Rambam? We can't pick and choose with the Rambam. The Rambam is also well known by all the leaders of every generation. Rav Elyashiv and Rav Shlomo Feinstein and Rav Shlomo Zalman, they all knew the Rambam too. So why is it that we have the method of kollel? Why do we have this kollel? The idea is we are not as strong as previous generations. In the times of the Talmud, you see that they were. Rav Papa was a wine merchant, and Rabbi Yeshua was a blacksmith. They were able to work and master Torah and rise to very high levels of Torah scholarship. The feeling is that we, in our generation, we are not able to achieve Torah scholarship and to produce people who can then be poskim and Torah leaders and so on and so forth, unless there is a chance for singular devotion only to Torah and being supported by others. And therefore, the Gedolei Yisrael, based on the circumstances, have determined that this is the need of the generation, and that's why we do it in our generation. A person could study a lot, and certainly a man who has to work to support his family. Well, you gave your wife a ksuba. I'll get to you one second. You gave your wife a ksuba when you get married. Where's Moshe Aryeh over there? You know, when you give your wife a ksuba, that ksuba is your obligation to support her. I'll get to you one second, Mayor. It's your obligation to support her. So if you have to support her, a person can't say, well, listen, I want to learn, somebody support me. We don't have a right to do that. But if you have the means of support, and you are capable of learning and being a happy person doing so, then if all else is equal, and it needs guidance to know when all else is equal, then a person should certainly choose to do that. But that's if all else is equal. So the idea of not learning full-time simply because of, on principle, I don't want to learn full-time, that we don't go with. That Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked by a young man who is studying kollel and is being productive in his study and he's happy, if he doesn't like taking money, he doesn't like being supported by others, if he can leave kollel simply because of that, Rabbi Moshe said that is the Yetzer Hara talking to you. Because if you have the opportunity and the ability to do so, you have to do so. I was studying in kollel, and I told you my wife had put me on probation from playing basketball for 6 months, and then I broke my foot when I finally went back and played again. So I had a broken foot, and I had a cast on my foot. And after about a week and a half or 2 weeks, I had to have the cast changed. So I go into the doctor. He's a secular guy from Chicago, so we hit it off right away. And he wasn't a White Sox fan, so we were getting along fine. And then at a certain point, he said to me, he's examining my foot, my broken foot, and at a certain point he said to me, so what do you do? So I said, I study in kollel. He said, well, who supports you? I said, well, my wife works. So he said very cynically, he goes, somebody has to, huh? So I didn't say anything, but I was thinking to myself, I'll tell you exactly what I was thinking. My very thought was, you jerk, right? You went to medical school, somebody supported you. You either got government loans, which is essentially a giveaway, or your father supported you, or your wife was working, because to you that was a value, and therefore for you, that was okay to be supported by others while you went through medical school. Well, this is a value to us, and if my father or father-in-law or Rosh Kollel feel they want me to study Torah and support me, what's it your business? I'm not asking you for money. And I didn't say any of this to him because he had my broken foot in his hand. But at the end of the day, if it's a value to my wife and she wants to work so that I can study Torah, or my father or father-in-law or Rosh Kollel or whoever it is, so, who am I bothering exactly? Who's bothering? People in Israel, they say, well, the religious are a bunch of parasites. They take money from the government. Well, where does the government get money from? The government gets money from America, so they're the biggest parasites of all. The entire country is a kollel over here. So what's a few more people studying in kollel? Right? Can't do anything without Americans' permission. So the idea of studying, the only way we who are weak can study and master Torah is with full-time immersion in Torah. And I'm talking about full-time immersion. I know guys who learn in kollel. I have two son-in-laws who learn in kollel, a son who learns in kollel, and my other son learned in kollel. A person who studies, people who study in kollel, I have two sons in kollel, one son who was in kollel, now he's a mashgiach. At the end of the day, it's a very demanding lifestyle. It's very demanding. That means the mindset of somebody studying kollel is when you're not doing something else, you're studying Torah. That means when there's the hours in kollel, and the hours outside of kollel are when you're not doing something else, you're studying Torah. That's your natural, what they call your idling state. So you eat your Shabbos meal, you may take a nap, and then you study Torah. And when Shabbos ends, you eat Shalosh Shadot, Malav Malka, and then you study Torah. And during the week you come home, and after 3 hours after a full day of studying Torah, if there's nothing else to do in the house, talk to your wife, take care of the kids, put them to sleep, then you study more Torah. It's a very demanding. It takes a tremendous amount of stamina. I did it for 5 years full-time and 2 years half-time, and it was very, 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 very difficult. So the only way for a person to master it, that's why we do that nowadays. That's where it comes from. Yes, Mayor, you're going to ask something.
Yeah. So if we say that, coming back to the idea of the Tumah of death, that's the highest level of Tumah. That's why we required the highest level of Kedusha, so to speak, to get rid of it, which was the requirement of the temple.
In the other direction. We, the Jewish person, is the highest level of Kedusha because we have the highest level neshama. When the neshama leaves, there's a vacuum. The neshama leaves. The body is now left. There's a vacuum in the body. There was a neshama, and now the neshama has left. So that vacuum, which is created by the neshama leaving, now is filled with all sorts of impurities that wish these impurities would like to connect to Kedusha. Why? Because that's what it says in the Kabbalistic works. So I don't know any more about it. And therefore, the body has got the highest level of Tumah.
But why we do not have nowadays the way to get rid of this tumah?
Because we don't have the Parah Adumah nowadays, because we don't have the Beis Hamikdash.
So that's
Yeah. Yes, Adam, go ahead.
All right, can I?
No, go ahead, please.
I hope I'm connecting.
Yeah, go ahead.
When someone is born, the woman is also in a state of impurity.
Correct.
So for a male, it's less time. For a female, it's more time.
Correct.
Is there some connection with that to this as well?
One of the ideas is that a woman who has given birth, if she gives birth to another female, so there's a double potential for tumah there. Just like the mother can become tummy, the daughter can become tummy, and therefore that's one of the explanations. That's one of the explanations. Okay, now let's go on. If you take a look, we're now on a completely different subject, something a little happier. On page 842, well, not so much. Page 842, fourth line from the top. Vayavo b'nei Yisrael kol ha'ida midbar tzin b'chodesh harishon. The Jewish people come to the desert of Tzin. Vayeshevam bekodesh vatamas sham Miriam. Miriam dies. Vatikaver sham. Miriam dies and she is buried there. Miriam dies there and she is buried there. So first of all, the Mefarshim ask, if you notice, there's something a bit strange. It says she dies there. Vatamas sham Miriam. Vatikaver sham. She dies there and she's buried there. And then it says v'lohaya mayim la'eda. There was no water. Now, why was there no water? So Rashi points out, well, whose merit was the water there? The water was there. Remember we said the manna was in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. The clouds of glory were in the merit of Aaron. And the water was there in the merit of Miriam. Why was the water there in the merit of Miriam? Well, for one thing, she waited by the water when Moshe Rabbeinu was what do you call it? And she helped the babies, the mothers, to give the babies when the babies were born. Paro wanted the babies to be killed, and Miriam was helping. She helped support, keep the Jewish people alive, and therefore the water. Miriam dies over there. Vatamas sham, vatikaver sham. So the commentaries say v'lohaya mayim la'eda. There was no water. Why did the water dry up? So when it says there was no water, that alludes to the idea that there are no tears. The people didn't cry and mourn for Miriam. We don't find anywhere it says they mourned for Miriam. When Moshe died, it says they mourned for Moshe. When Aaron died, they mourned for Aaron. But it doesn't say they mourned for Miriam. And therefore, since you didn't shed tears for Miriam, the water dried up, the source of the water dried up. One idea. There's another idea that the water dried up because that shows the people whose merit the water was there for. That when Miriam dies, it disappeared. So you realize why the water was there. It was there in her merit. Now, why didn't the people cry? So I'll tell you a frightening thought. Since we're on such a happy subject today anyway. You know, when people find it hard to cry when an older person dies. Yeah, a guy's 95 years old and he dies. You're like, oh, well, you know, how long did you expect it to go on? You know, that's generally the reaction. When a younger person dies, chas v'shalom, so a person, you know, everybody's all shaken up. When a younger person is different, everybody gets all rattled. So a big Rav once said to me, logically it should be the opposite. Because when a younger person dies, at least we can comfort ourselves and say, well, it won't happen to me. You know, if the guy was in a motorcycle accident or the guy, something, there is a chance you could say, well, it won't happen to me. But when an older person dies, nobody can say it won't happen to me. Because all statistics have shown, all studies have shown, there is still a 100% mortality rate among mankind. Everybody's on the list, except for 9 people in history, the Medrash says, did not die physical death as we understand it. Eliyahu Hanavi and several other people. But 9 out of all the people who have been alive in the history of the world, our odds are not good. Right? So everybody's on the list. Yet, human nature is that people don't cry when somebody older dies. So they didn't cry when Miriam died. Why did they cry when Aaron died? Oh, that's a little different. Because when Aaron died, Moshe and his son Eliezer go up a mountain, and they come down and say, oh, by the way, the three of them go up the mountain, and the two of them come down and say, oh, by the way, we got some distressing news. Aaron died. We buried him in the cave up there. So it took the people by surprise. Hey, we didn't get to say goodbye. We didn't know. We didn't get a bracha from him. So they cried when Aaron died because there was an element of surprise there. And when Moshe Rabbeinu died, they knew he was going to die because he said, I'm going up to the mountain to die. But they never got to bury him. They didn't get to bury him because they don't know where his burial place is. So they cried. Here the Torah emphasizes she died there and she was buried there. And therefore the people thought, look, no, it's an older person. She died, she buried, we got to say goodbye. So the people didn't cry. They didn't cry. There was no water. I want to show you something remarkable. Take a look at the word Miriam. Take a look at the word Miriam. Fifth line from the top. How do you spell it? Miriam. Mem, Resh, Yud, Mem. Take out the Resh. What have you got? Mayim. You got Mayim. In Miriam's name is the word Mayim. In Miriam's name. You see that? Mem. Five lines from the top. Mem, Resh, Yud, Mem. Take out the Resh. What have you got? Mayim. Not only that, you know what the word rush means? What is a rush in Hebrew?
Head.
That's a rosh. That's a rosh is a head. What's a rush? A rush is a poor person. The commentaries point out that it's alluded the idea, Miriam, when she died, the wall that's left is the resh. That means the people became impoverished of water when Miriam died, all contained in her name. Miriam is the well of water. More than that, why is the water, we start speaking about why the water came in the merit of Miriam, where did Yaakov Avinu go when he was looking, where did Eliezer go when he was looking for a shidduch for Yitzchak?
The well.
He went to the well. Where did Yaakov go when he was looking for a shidduch?
Also a well.
Where did Moshe Rabbeinu go when he was looking for a shidduch? A well. Why did they go to the well? Why did they go to the well? Okay, so the basic idea is that's where you're going to find people. The old world, in the ancient world, where people didn't have sinks and faucets. So everybody eventually got to the well. But when you're looking for a wife, what is the wife? The wife is the source of life. The woman is the source of life. She is the well of life. And therefore, she is the one. And therefore, the idea of going to the well is the idea of going to look for the source of life. And therefore, Miriam, who is a source of life, Miriam is the one who in her merit, the water which comes from a well, that's why the water is there in the merit of Miriam. Miriam dies, and then when Miriam dies, now they don't have water. So the people start complaining. So what do? V'lohaya mayim la'eda, there was no water. Vayikalu al Moshe v'al Aaron, they gather on Moshe and Aaron, and vayarev ha'em Moshe, they start quarreling with Moshe. Why? I wish we would have died sooner. Now you took us out to die in thirst. So it's very interesting because there are only two places in the Torah. And how many times, by the way, did the Jewish people quarrel with Moshe Rabbeinu? How many times were there like griping and belly aching on the part of the Jewish people? You know, when you read the Torah, you get the idea that every 5 minutes they were kvetching about something, right? That's what it looks like. Gentlemen, it was 10 times in 40 years. Any rabbi of a shul whose congregants only get unhappy 10 times in 40 years would be thrilled. In most shuls it's 10 times a week, not 10 times in 40 years. So just one, we'll end with this, but just one piece of knowledge that you have to know. You see, what just happened was, we went from the rebellion of Korach, which was in which year, gentlemen? The second year that they came out of the desert. That's when they get the decree of 40 years. From page 836, which is the end of the previous Parsha, and we start Zos Chukas Torah, and now Miriam dies. We are now in the 40th year. 38 years they were good. Not a complaint for 38 years. How do you like that? How do you like that? Can you imagine? So that means that after everything took place in the second year, and now we're into the third, now we're into the 40th year. There is nothing in the Torah that's reported between the second year and the 40th year. We skipped 38 years. So for 38 years they were in the desert living properly, and then we go to the 40th year here where the events pick up again. Just so you should know what's happening in the perspective, get the Torah in a perspective. And now the people start kvetching. What are they kvetching about? And remember, what did they ever kvetch about? Here they're kvetching, listen, there's something little like we're dying of thirst. That's a valid kvetch. It's not like, the rabbi's speeches are too long. They're not kvetching about that. And why do we need new furniture for the shul? They're kvetching about, listen, we and our children are dying of thirst. That's a valid, we don't see they get punished for this. Because there's a valid, listen, you're dying of thirst. Hey, listen, what are we going to do? We can't be without water for too long. All right.